Hello, beautiful human being, and welcome back to the Ryan Magic Show. In this episode, I'm going to be sharing my experience of living off the land, hunting for my food, which I did at the end of 2022. And it's been 18 months that this story has been inside of me, and it did have a really big influence over me going through that journey. So in this episode, I'm going to tell the first half of the learnings that I got from the experience. And I'll pre-frame that I was taking notes during that journey, and there was about 40 full pages of notes that I took, documenting my experience and the wisdom that was coming from this very unique opportunity to try on life. Not exactly like, but on some level similar to our ancestors. And I'm going to be sharing learnings. I'm going to be sharing some magic moments from the experience as well. And we'll just see how we go. It's definitely going to be broken into minimum 2 episodes, could be 3. So before we get into this episode, if you're not following me over on Instagram and you haven't actually directly connected with me, send me a message on there, or you could email me. I just want to connect more directly. This stage of the journey, if you're on this path and you're trusting me to support you to live a more fulfilled life, I have so much respect and so much excitement for you to be on that path. And so I'd love to connect. Either hit me up at the Ryan Magic on Instagram or shoot me an email, ryan@ryanmagic.com. Anyway, let's get into the episode for today. So to give context, I invested in a expert of living off the land, a really incredible man, and his name's Adam Kavanagh, and I'll put a link to his Instagram in the show notes so you guys can check out his story. He essentially, to paraphrase it, went through some mental health stuff in life, and just being a country boy, felt the pull to go and spend more time in nature, and he ended up traveling around and learning a set of skills that allows him to be able to live from nature. That involves a lot of hunting and foraging, knowing how to start a fire, keep shelter, and to navigate difficult situations and challenges that arise. And a friend of mine, Tim Morrison, I saw had done this journey, and it really inspired me. I was like, wow, that looks like a cool experience. And essentially what Adam offers as one of his offerings is for you to do a one-on-one immersive experience living off the land for 10 days in a really remote area of Queensland called Doomadgee. It's not the only place that the experience is centered in, but that was like a bit of a home base. And Doomadgee is essentially right up the top of Queensland, but over near the border of Northern Territory. And so it's as remote as it gets. And I did this experience in the end of 22 in summer when it was the dry season, but it was about to transition into the wet season. So it was very interesting timing to do the experience because the average temperature each day was 45 degrees Celsius, which is well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It was extreme. And just to give some background on what inspired the experience, I've got a big list of different stories that I want to cover and learnings that I want to share. Just some background first. The thing that made me want to go out there was to challenge myself to learn to live in alignment with nature. If all of a sudden society collapsed, if all the modern comforts were taken to the side, how would I actually feel living a life of simplicity? And I wanted to connect to my primitive masculine. I wanted to use it as a bit of an initiation to access the internal part of me that can survive. It was a metaphor for me challenging myself in multiple ways, because it wasn't just about go hard and warrior energy, but also, can I be okay in simplicity? And so, to be honest with you, when I first signed up and had a chat with Adam, I was thinking the experience was going to be a lot more of an opportunity to survive off very little. I thought I was going to be being okay with hunger, learning to be okay with hunger. I thought I was going to be learning to encounter the fear of being in nature, and I was going to learn to forage and gather different foods, different bush tucker, as we call it in Australia. And after chatting to Adam the first time, he gave me some feedback that this is going to be a hunting experience if I want to do it. It's the end of dry season, meaning that without the water, there isn't really much to eat unless you're eating animal. You can't just eat the grass. There's no fruits growing. So there's no vegetation really that you can eat, just very, very minimal, like 5 calories here, a couple of calories there. It's not going to be enough to survive off. So you're going to have to learn to hunt. And he said, you can run down animals. We can do that. Or we can use a bow and arrow. And because I just had a bit of an Achilles injury, I wasn't able to run. So all of a sudden, thinking I was going into an experience mainly about just being in nature, I was told that it was going to be a hunting experience. And I instantly knew, okay, this is going to be an opportunity for me to really access the primitive part of me and see whether or not I can hold myself in integrity and be able to be a part of the entire process of eating meat. Can I actually kill an animal? Can I process an animal? And can I stomach that? Because I'm currently living off that full process, but I'm not involved. I'm completely disassociated from most of it. So I knew it was going to be an opportunity for me to see if I can actually be in integrity with myself with that. And it was a very, very, very interesting experience indeed. So I essentially flew out to Queensland. I then had to take another small plane, and then I got picked up by Adam at Mount Isa, which is a mining town in remote Queensland. And then we drove for a solid 6 hours to get all the way across to Doomadgee. And then we went into the bush and started preparing the equipment and what we needed to be able to do the experience. So that's a little pre-frame. Now I'm just going to go through and start going through some of the pieces that I got from the experience. So essentially, the first big thing that I had to navigate was I was told, hey, here's the bow. Here's how you use it. And when I first picked up the bow, it was so daunting to even pull the string back the whole way. But actually, after a solid hour or two of practicing, I was actually nailing the use of it. So it was a bit of a natural, which was cool. Adam said it usually takes people 2 to 4 days to master the bow, and it took me a couple of hours. And he's like, holy crap, we're ready to go. So we pretty much camped where we arrived the first day. And then the next day we went out hunting. So I was like thinking that I would have more time to reconcile what it was going to be like to kill an animal. Now, without telling the whole journey chronologically, I'm just going to zoom into specific stories that have learnings that I want to share. The first one is on that very first day of hunting, we actually because we were driving around in a very well kitted out car that was required for us to be literally 300 kilometers away from any other human being. That's how far away, that's how remote it was. And so we were driving that distance away from anywhere in this super remote Indigenous land, of which Adam's friends who are Indigenous people had given him and myself permission to be on. And it's the first day of hunting, about a third of the way into the day. And Adam has spotted a wild pig. And so we parked about 100 meters away from where we could see that it was sleeping. And we spent about 30 to 60 minutes walking 5 centimeters at a time in a stalk. So we're stalking this pig. And I was already feeling anxious about the fact that I may, if we stalk effectively, have the opportunity to get some food, because I was fasting unless I was to catch something. And I'd already been fasting for 2 days because I started fasting before I got there, before I flew up and whatnot. And so it had already been a couple of days since I'd eaten, and I was feeling a little bit thrown into the experience. It was jarring to know, holy crap, I could already be having to face the killing of an animal. That was the thing that I was most nervous of. And so we stalked, and then I got to the point where I was in shooting range, and Adam had already pre-framed, where do you have to shoot it? How do you need to shoot it with a bow and arrow? And to be honest with you, I was in a bit of freeze response. Like I was in slow motion. I was very nervous and pulled back the bow, took my aim and shot. And it was all happening so fast. But what happened was this pig that was sleeping, wild pig. And one thing to pre-frame is that wild animals are very different to domesticated farm animals. I found out quickly. Adam had almost been killed by a wild pig in the past that bowled him over and then had its tusks coming out of its mouth and was shoveling its tusks, trying to find the artery in his leg to kill him. And it actually put the tusk through his hand as it was attacking him. And he got lucky that it got scared off and bailed, but he would have died otherwise. So they can be huge and they can be very dangerous. And so it wasn't just a matter of, can you take fire before it runs off? It was, if you let it see you, it's going to charge. So be careful. And so anyway, take aim, fire. The arrow that I shoot goes right next to its heart. And ideally, when hunting, I found out you want to shoot it through the heart so that it dies relatively quickly. But I just missed. And so it was still going to die. It was just going to take a little bit longer. And what happened was that the boar got hit, it was kind of laying down asleep, and then it kind of stood up, a little bit confused, walked around a little bit, having a look, and it did a big circle, and then it went back to the exact same spot. So it probably took like 5 minutes having a little walk around, seeing what happened. It was very relaxed, but it was a bit confused. And then, boom, second shot straight through the heart. And then it's walked a few, maybe 10 meters away, and then fell down and passed away. And this was my first experience of hunting an animal and killing an animal. And I was expecting it to be ruthless. I was expecting it to be like savage, but it was very, very peaceful. It was very, very relaxed because we were in camouflage. It could barely see us. It wasn't scared. It wasn't running. It just was relaxed. It was obviously confused, but I don't know if you guys listening have ever been hit by something incredibly hard. Like, for example, once when I was playing golf, someone hit the golf ball from like 200 meters away and it hit me in the back of the leg. And it hit me so hard, maybe going 150 Ks an hour or something like that. And it did some damage there, but it just kind of felt like I got, like because it happened so fast and it was so intense. I didn't really know what happened because it was, if that makes sense. And it felt like a similar experience, even though this pig got shot, it happened so fast and the arrow goes through so quickly and intensely. It doesn't know it didn't know what had happened. It was just a little bit kind of like, whew, what, my body feels a little bit weird, but why is that like that? What's going on? And so I was just really surprised at how actually peaceful the experience was. And because I was being taught by someone that is a man of high integrity, that takes a lot of care in the way that he hunts animals, it was a sacred experience. And what sacred means to me is something that is special and intentional. So that's how I describe the word sacred. And so it was special. It was special because it was done with honor and reverence, and it was very intentional. It was for a specific reason. It was to eat. And that was that first experience. And after the animal had passed, I took some time with it and just sat with it and had my hand on it and honored it. And I was just blown away at how seamless the experience was. And I was like, wow, we're going to get to eat wild caught meat on this first day. I was wrong, because after then getting a hunting knife or a processing knife, and Adam was showing me how to process a wild animal, and I got in there and this pig actually had worms, and it's not relevant to know how to detect that, but Adam's an expert and he did, which meant that it was going to be dangerous for us to eat it. And nothing goes to waste in there. So a bunch of other animals would have come and eaten it anyway. And it was quite old, so it was towards the end of its life. But here I was thinking, wow, I'm going to get a feast right like only a couple of days in. And I was like, wow, this is my first day hunting, first shot, and I was able to catch something. I'm just going to have an absolute, like, it's going to be so easy out here. And it wasn't that way at all. I didn't end up eating for several more days. And yeah, I'll get to that with another story. But just kicking off first, telling that first story, I was shocked at how peaceful that experience was of hunting with a bow. And I was thinking running down an animal would be way more peaceful and like way more organic and natural than hunting with a bow and arrow. But I actually did run down some pigs on the last day, just to fast track to that experience. And it was brutal. It was brutal. I was chasing this pig down and it was screeching and screaming and running for its life in terror. And I was like, far out. And in order to grab it, it's dangerous. I had to literally kick its hind legs out and then grab it. And then I sat with this pig holding its legs kind of like a wheelbarrow so it couldn't run away. And then Adam had run off somewhere else. Just pre-frame the explicit nature of what I'm going to go through here and talk about here. But yeah, as I was waiting with this pig, I knew, holy crap, I was going to have to kill this animal. And it was just panting. It was exhausted after the run. I was exhausted. And it was like trying to get away, but it couldn't because it was so difficult to, because I was grabbing its hind legs. And I had to, that was really difficult and so much more difficult than that first kill on the first day, because I felt like I'd connected with it and it knew that I was there. It was nervous. It was in a fight or flight response. It was aggressive as well. But at this stage of just holding it, it was more, I was just kind of projecting that it was feeling terrified, and I was just waiting for Adam, who would run off in another direction, to come back to get his guidance on what I could do next, because I had a hunting knife. So I knew that I was going to have to stab this pig in the heart with a knife. And I was super nervous about that. And I was just trying to talk myself through it and ground into that reality. And that felt a lot more intense than it did to shoot the animal with a bow and arrow. That was super peaceful, super humane if there is a humane way to eat an animal or kill an animal, it was definitely the most humane way. Yeah, I was waiting there knowing that I was going to have to stab and kill this wild pig. And then 10 minutes later, Adam comes back. And I was like, all right, mate, what do I have to do? And he was like, oh, you don't have to kill it. We've got enough meat. And I was like, what? This whole time I've been freaking out that I'm going to have to kill this animal. And I was like, man, I've just hyped myself up to this and I don't even have to do it now. But then what happened was, the second that Adam got within distance of myself and this wild pig, the wild pig just turned into an absolute feral savage trying to kill him. It was making all these loud animalistic sounds and just going at him. And I was like, whoa, this whole time, because it wasn't doing that to me while I was holding it. And Adam's like, when you let this pig go, it is going to try to attack you. And so I kind of got myself ready to run and jump into the car. And I kind of threw it off in a way and then sprinted, and it just turned around at me, just like threatening to go me. And I kind of realized then this is being in nature it is a full experience. There is a lot more to this than the way that we're sheltered to as the average person in the Western world. The killing of animals. There can be some real savagery in there, and it's survival versus survival. It's survival versus survival. So that was my first kind of experience in this. And I'm just going to check if I had any. No, sweet. So I'm just going to use this to talk about my perspective on farming versus wild caught meat. So first and foremost, from my experience, if the hunter has the stomach and inner strength in a way or whatever's needed to be able to kill an animal, it is definitely, from my subjective bias, more humane to hunt an animal than it is to process them in a processing building in a mainstream farming model. And just when I see animals that are crammed into a hot metal truck driving on a road, it is so different for them to be in that environment versus what it is for them to be in nature. As much as nature is savage and scary, and death is just around the corner for any animal that's in nature, it is seriously slower pace. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more with some other pieces I want to share, but it would be incredibly scary and confusing and overwhelming for an animal to go into a processing building to be killed and then harvested versus being stealthily shot with a bow where it doesn't even know what's happened. It's kind of confused. It's still in its natural environment. The process is very quick and it's pretty peaceful. It's very, very different to what I was expecting. Very, very different to what I was expecting. And if someone had a gun as well, and unless someone is shooting like the mother of an animal that has its baby there, and then the baby doesn't know what to do because the mother's passed, that would be unfortunate, and that would definitely be overwhelming for the group of animals there. But the way that this happened with this animal that was by itself was super relaxing and peaceful and felt like as humane as it could have been, other than the fact that if I'd shot it through the heart the first go, which was my bad, being quite a new hunter. But it really didn't react too much, and that just caught me by surprise. So that's the first thing that I wanted to share. My perspective is that hunting is more humane than buying meat from the supermarket. Unless you're sourcing meat from a known humane farmer, then it's definitely going to be more humane to hunt an animal in the wild than it is to eat it from the shops, which I never expected to say that, but it's just from my experience. That's what I believe. But a factor to consider from my research of the world and understanding of our anthropology, the study of our evolution of us as human beings, is that the max population size that we've had on planet Earth as human beings, as hunter-gatherers, foragers, as it can be called, the max population size that our Earth can hold is around 6 million people at an estimate. And I didn't know this before. I was like, why don't we all just have access, like go hunting for our food? And it's just nowhere near possible. And so population capped out 6 million people or so. And then once agriculture started, roughly 10,000 years ago, that's when the population started to increase, because with our agriculture and controlled farming, people were able to get way more food supplies from a way smaller land mass versus foraging, in which, for example, the Aboriginal population of Australia, the Indigenous population of Australia before European settlement and colonization, was 250,000. So that's where the Australian native people were here for 40,000 plus years, and they didn't expand their population growth above 250,000. So if you imagine every suburb, because the average suburb in Australia, I think it has about 5 to 10,000 people. So instead of in a whole suburb, if you think about it this way, having 5 to 10,000 people, each suburb is having 50 to 100 people. That's the difference in population numbers. So the reason that we've been able to expand the global population size of human beings is because of modern agriculture and farming. And so I didn't know that before I did this experience. That's only been in my research over the last 6 months. And so it's not possible to hunt all our food in the wild. Yeah. But from my experience, it's a lot more humane. Okay. So that's the first story I want to tell of this experience, and kind of putting a couple into the one. The next thing that I want to say that feels relevant is that wild caught meat is significantly healthier than agricultural farmed meat. And the reason why is because, and I witnessed this and understood this from the movement patterns and the tracking of animals and what Adam was telling me about how he knows where they are, is that animals have this intuitive desire to get the nutrients that they need in their body. This is, I haven't done research on this, but just from what I witnessed. Because if an animal is living in the wild, let's say a wild pig, they can eat water vegetation, they can eat all different sorts of grasses, they can eat different vegetables, root vegetables, they can eat fruits in the wild, like passion fruit, and they can also eat small animals, like frogs and turtles and different animals like that. So these pigs, sure, an animal, if it stumbles across something, is going to take opportunity of what's there, most likely. But a lot of the time, these mobs of pigs, these groups of pigs, circulate around knowing that they're going to go from one area to another area to get a specific food source. So they're going to go, all right, we're going to walk 30 kilometers this way or 10 kilometers this way, because we know in this area there tends to be a lot of passion fruit, and we need some of those vitamins. We need some of those nutrients. Now, in farming, we're just mass feeding animals barley and grain, or even if they're in a field and it's hay or grass, they're still eating the same thing. It's kind of like me just eating carrots and expecting to get all my needs met. So that was something that was really eye-opening, because if you get, which you can in Australia, even from the main supermarkets, Coles and Woolworths, you can get wild-caught kangaroo, because they don't farm kangaroos. So you can get wild-caught meat, and that wild-caught meat, the animals have been eating a variety of different leaves, grasses, water vegetation, fruits, vegetables, and to meet their needs, to meet the nutrient needs that they have. And so just common sense says that animal is going to have so much greater level of nutrients in its body. And my experience from eating the wild-caught meat that I did in the middle of nowhere was that the richness of taste was noticeably different. I'm not a massive fan of pork as a meat, eating pig, but the wild-caught pig tasted incredibly different. It's so much. It's kind of like if someone eats fish. If you eat fish and it's freshly caught, it tastes a lot less strong, and that's because it's fresh. It's got this mild, fresh taste, and it tastes healthy, really good quality fish. Same thing with this meat. When I was eating, at one point I ate wild cow, and I ate the liver, warm, fresh out of this animal. And to me, that was like, oh my gosh, this is going to taste disgusting, because I'd had a lot of beef liver from organically sourced meat in Melbourne, from the most premium source that I could possibly get. But the level of acidity that it tasted like, almost a metallic taste, in the store-bought one that I had, even from a well-sourced beef liver. But the wild one was so much more mild in taste. And I'm guessing that's because the cow has to process less crap through its liver. So the liver is a lot healthier, and it was a lot more of a mild taste. But the actual taste of the meat itself, and all the same cuts of meat from the wild pig, from the wild and the wild cow, they were the two main meats that I had, were just at least 3 times better tasting, because it's got that variety of nutrients that's forming the taste. It's kind of like if you had a farm and you had a cow on that farm, and you're feeding that cow nectarines and carrots and grass and water lilies and all these different things. It's probably going to taste different than if you're just feeding it barley or grain, the same grain, or even splitting the grain. It's still such a basic diet. So that was one thing I really noticed, and it shifted my desire to eat more wild-caught meat from that point on, which you can get wild venison, and you can get wild wallaby, and you can get wild kangaroo in Australia. So there are a few of the stories so far. Now, I haven't really talked about the level of risk in my experience, and I'm going to go through. Actually, I'm going to save that. Am I going to save that? No, I'm going to go into something else. So first, I'm going to talk about my observation of the way that the animal brain works from stalking them the entire time. And then I'm going to talk about my intention for an initiation, and talk about what I realized is the difference between a boy and a man from a tribal perspective. Okay. So I spent the entire 10 days virtually looking for animals and trying to find food. Sometimes I was preparing the food and cooking the food and starting a fire and finding shelter. But most of the time I was looking for animals, hunting animals, and the whole time was centered around getting enough food to survive. And so most of the time was around searching for animals. All right. That was most of the experience. And spending so much time watching animals, one thing that I noticed is that animals are in fight or flight, not in fight or flight, but in hypervigilance. Their nervous systems are online 100% of the time, even when they're sleeping. So if I was watching a wild, it was so difficult to catch a wild animal. It was so difficult to catch a wild pig, wild cow. They're not like domesticated farm cows. And in fact, on the very last day, there was some stray, as we're kind of making our way back closer towards society. There must have been some farmland there. And we'd worked so hard and hunted so resiliently and so perceptively and with so much preparation and so many long 60-minute stalks towards animals that hear us, see us, smell us from 100, 200 meters away and just bolt at like 30 to 50 kilometers an hour away, just way into the distance, never to be seen again. And they were so difficult to catch because they're in the wild and their senses are sharp. The domesticated animals are very different. If you just go onto a paddock and you see a bunch of cows, they've got no sense of danger. They're not taught by their mothers when they're being raised how to escape danger, and they don't worry about that. They're very different. Even wild pigs, if you put a farm pig into the actual wild, a domesticated pig, its skin and it starts to grow the tusks start to grow again, the fur, the thick layer of hide starts to grow, and it thickens and strengthens and becomes tough and ready for the wild. Domesticated animals are different. And on the very last night, after we'd finished the whole experience, our last night in the wild, a cow walked into our campsite when we were cooking beef. So we were cooking beef and the smell was just like spreading. The other animals, if we were doing anything to give off a smell like that or within kilometers of it, they'd bail. And a cow walked into our site. And it was just such a contrast. I was like, dude, there's a cow in our site. What the heck is happening? Because it was so difficult to catch the other animals. And he's like, mate, that's a domesticated cow. They are super disconnected from their perceptivity. They're completely naive. They got no idea what's going on. But side story there. But the point is that the actual wild animals are living in complete survival mode 24/7. I would be watching a pig and it is constantly smelling. Just smelling. Can I smell any threat? Can I smell any animals? Can I smell any danger? Constantly. Just 24/7 smelling. Its eyes, quick drink of water, straight back up. Looking. Straight back down for a drink, back up. Smelling, looking, listening. The ears are twitching around and moving. It's just using all of its senses the entire time so that on the off chance that a crocodile jumps out of the water, boom, it can escape. Or if some kind of predator starts going for it, it can run away. And it was incessant. It was 24/7. And I couldn't believe because it was so difficult. If we got 50 to 100 meters away from an animal and we were not even moving at all, and it couldn't see us, it couldn't hear us, but even if we weren't in a headwind, meaning a wind that was going from the animal towards us, so the wind was blowing its scent towards us, not the other way around. If it was just no wind, then it would pick up on our scent 50, 100 meters away. We'd have to be in a headwind, so our scent's being blown in the opposite direction. Otherwise, 100 meters away, it would smell and just bail. Fang it. No seeing, no hearing, just smell. And so they were on edge every moment of every day. Even when the animals were sleeping, they'd be smelling and their ears would be moving around, and they were keeping alert when they were sleeping. And that was just such an interesting revelation for me, because I teach about fear. I teach about the amygdala and the animal brain that we have, which works very similarly. It's on the lookout for danger. It's looking for threat. And watching these animals in the wild, and watching myself in the wild, which I'll talk more about in the next episode, because I'm going to split this into two. But yeah, watching these animals in the wild, they are constantly either looking for food and water, or more specifically, while trying not to be food for something else. So they're trying to find food and trying not to be food, become food. They're trying to stay alive 24/7. I couldn't believe it. But it kind of shows us, because I talk a lot about the difference between the fear consciousness and fulfillment consciousness. In other words, the head and the heart. And that heart consciousness is our prefrontal cortex. That's the aspect of us that knows intuition, that has imagination, that has strategic thinking, has the capacity to future pace, all these more being qualities of our advanced humanity. And these wild animals don't have that brain. They're more in their fear brain. Their brain's more programmed to find food and not become food. And they're doing it 24/7. And so if you as a human being are hypervigilant in any way, and we're being triggered by modern technology and modern society to feel on edge, even though there's not a threat, when our brain perceives that there's a threat, that same aspect of our brain that's similar to the animal's brain turns on. And we go into that hypervigilant nature, which was just really, really interesting to observe that with every animal, every single animal. Yeah. Interesting. Very, very interesting. And so that's what happens with us when we are dysregulated, or when our animal brain, which we have as well, turns on. Next thing that I want to share with you guys, which was probably one of the biggest intentions I went in with, as I pre-framed at the start, was to have an initiation experience. And because so much of the journey that I was on for the 10 days was centered around food, and I also had the fortune to witness, meet, and engage with some Indigenous Australians that were young men learning how to hunt and process meat for the first time. It was a really special experience. And for me, just being in that mode the whole time, I was constantly asking myself the question, what's the difference between being a boy and a man? What's the difference? How can I initiate myself? Because that's what I was looking for. I was looking for an initiation into manhood. And talking to some of the tribes people and seeing the way that they interacted on that hunt, when there is a closer connection with nature and the way that our hardware and ancestry and our biology has developed was for foraging. That was our way of operating as our exact breed of Homo sapiens have been around for 150 to 200,000 years. For the vast majority of that time, let's say it's 200,000 years, from 200,000 years ago to 10,000 years ago, that 190,000 year stretch, we were gathering the whole time and hunting the whole time. And from seeing interviews with tribes people and meeting tribes people, the proudest moment of most men in a tribe, the proudest moment of their entire lives, is the first day that they catch something in the wild and bring that food home for the tribe to eat. That's like the big moment that they feel they've gone from being dependent on the tribe for survival to actually providing to the tribe's survival. Big shift. And I realized that so much of us in society, and I'm speaking more to men right now, as men, I know how it feels to contribute. I know how primitive and inbuilt it is in my masculine archetypal psychology to want to contribute and feel like my presence matters and that I'm giving and offering something. I'm using my strength, my body to support. And that skill is kind of taken away for a lot of mainstream men, a lot of Western men. We don't have that capacity to feel that we can contribute like we used to, and was common for us to get that feeling of meaning and get that feeling of belonging, essentially being a productive and relevant member of the tribe. And so what I saw and felt into was there is a lot that goes into finding food in the wild. Obviously, if I was a sharper, more experienced hunter, it would be easier, but still, it is not easy if I was living as a forager to hunt, catch, process, transport, and prepare by setting up the fire and cutting up the meat and all these things, and then cook and then serve. All these steps in the process of giving food for survival reasons to the tribe. It was a massive ordeal. But what I realized is that for me, I'd always been lazy with my food. I was always given food when I was up until when my mum left when I was 13. And then after then, unfortunately, I had McDonald's for 3 years, pretty much every night from my dad, who didn't cook and stuff because of his mental state. And still, I was still provided food. And for most of my adult life, up until essentially this experience 18 months ago, and I'd started a little bit before then, but I was being quite lazy with my food. I was still eating a lot of processed food. I was eating a lot of pre-prepared food and Uber Eats and eating out and all of this stuff. And I realized if I was in the wild and it would take me a good chunk of every single day to organize food, to become a man in my life, I can at least start taking my health choices seriously. I can learn to source my own food. I can learn to find good quality shops, do the shopping, learn to cook a variety of meals so I get different nutrients, and learn to provide that for myself first and foremost. That was like one of the biggest takeaways I got from the experience from an initiation perspective. Boy has food provided to them. Man provides food for the tribe. That was a big thing that clicked for me. And it was like, well, I'm not providing food. If I go to some kind of gathering or party, I'm very rarely bringing food. I usually just buy something and bring it. And I realized just based on the amount of time I spent in the wild needing to do this, the least I could do is spend an hour a day or just over an hour a day and an hour a week doing the market shops, or a couple hours a week shopping and an hour a day cooking, being present and providing for myself, supporting myself, looking after myself. Not needing to do it out in the wild where I'm needing to hunt and do all those steps that I mentioned. I have the convenience of going to a good quality butcher, getting good quality meat, going to a good quality local grocer and getting fresh fruit and vegetables. It really isn't difficult. And I also realized that there is so much abundance and generosity from Mother Nature in the way of food. The food is being prepared for us, and there is so much of it. There is so much of it available. There's so much variety and range in taste as well, that there is enough nice tasting food with herbs, spices, salt, pepper, all these different ways to flavor food. And eating meat, vegetables, and fruit, and some grains, there is enough, and nuts, some nuts. There's enough in that to be able to have a epic, delicious array of food if I just put in the time. I don't have to be having pasta. I don't have to be having pizza. I don't have to be having bread. I'm not saying that I wouldn't have that, but as a baseline, there is so much abundance. There is so much epic tasting food that I can get access to if I just pull my finger out and start looking after myself as a grown adult man. And it's a simple skill. So many of the population have it. I didn't. And so I feel this activation within me. And since then, I prepare virtually all of my food. It's so rare that I eat out. Maybe once every 2 months, I'll eat out. And all the rest of the meals are bought, cooked by me. And that feels really, really powerful for me. And I had the intention over time, when the timing allows, and I feel like, yes, now's the time, to continue to sharpen my hunting skills and learn to find wild animals that I can catch and eat and bring that food back for my friends and family. And at the bare minimum, myself and my beautiful partner. So that was a really, really big one. That distinction between being a boy and a man. All right. Now I'm just going to share a couple of magic moments, and then I'm going to wrap up this episode and we'll transition into the next one. So one of my favorite experiences was seeing a wild frilled neck lizard. Now, if you've ever seen this beautiful Australian creature, they're these lizards that are small, but when they feel threatened, they've got these you see some of those old medieval portraits where people have those big frilly necks. Well, there's an actual lizard that, kind of like how a parachute just goes and just comes out. Its neck just goes massive, and it's got almost like this crinkly, big, round skin that flares out to scare off predators. And then the cute thing that it does is it actually runs at people because it's escape. It's got very sharp claws. As it runs to try to escape danger, they run up trees. And so when they see people, if they get scared, they run to try to climb up you to try to get away from the fear. That's just an instant primitive response that they have. And so we were driving out of a particular spot where we hunted, myself and Adam, on this experience, and he spotted it and he parked the car, and it had kind of run a meter up the tree and it was just still to try to hide. And Adam went to the other side of the tree and then put his arms around it and grabbed it with his hands. And then I got to hold it. It was so special. It was so awesome. It was this beautiful creature, and I got to pat it. I got a little photo and a video with it too. But that was definitely one of my magic moments. Another magic moment that I want to share. I'm wondering if I should share this now. Well, I kind of touched on it, so I'm going to go a little bit deeper into this experience. But one of the magic moments was getting to be a part of the Indigenous tribe, a couple of the elders teaching a big group of the youngsters how to process a wild caught animal. And so they hunted down a cow and they killed the cow, and there were all these kids around. And literally, this is how they do it there. It's really different, the culture up at this area of Australia, a lot more wild. The way that they got there was in one main car, which was a 4-wheel drive, and they had maybe 10 Indigenous boys on the roof and maybe 6 inside the car, 3 or 4 hanging off each side and a couple on the back. And so they probably had 20 boys, like young men, on this car coming in. And so there's all these youngsters, and they killed the cow right there. They then had the cow was lying on its side, and they processed it. And they were teaching the young boys how to process it. So first they cut open the cow on one side and then started taking out all the different bits of meat. So it's like, okay, cool. There's the steak. There's the liver. There's the chuck meat, the slow cooked meat. There's the brisket, and they were just pulling all the different parts out. There's the heart, and then this was really magical to see these young kids learning this, and the fact that they even get taught something like that. And in the Western world, we could go, oh, that's gross, but it was a really special thing for them to learn, and I thought it was really powerful for them to have that skill. But what I thought was amazing was that there was just such a sharing nature between these Indigenous men and young men. It was just like people were like, oh, I dibs this, I dibs that. But everyone just wanted their one little piece and then no more than that. And maybe it was because I hadn't eaten for a good solid multiple days, 4 or 5 days at this point. But I was like, I'll take some of that. And my brain instantly went to, how much do I get? Which is a scarcity response. It's like a selfish scarcity response. Didn't cross any of these men's mind. They were just, oh, cool, I'll just take my one piece. And there was heaps left over. And then Adam was offering it to them. Hey, you can take this as well. You can, and they're less well off financially as well. But they don't care because they just hang out together most of the time. They do things like fishing in the days, and this is way different culture because it's so remote. But they would just be hanging out by the river and fishing and hunting, and they didn't have any need, because there was. But by the way, just to preframe, there were some young men, some kids, and some adults that were there in the experience. But the adults were just like, they could easily have taken more for their family for food for the next few days, but Adam was offering it to them, and they're like, no, I don't need more than that. I've got my thing. I'm all good. And there was just this beautiful open-heartedness, this abundant, loving, sharing, reciprocal, symbiotic energy. I don't want to glamorize it too much, but there was a nature there, a beautiful, deep nature of generosity, of spirit. And the feeling that I was getting was that their needs are so met by each other. There's so much sharing. And I witnessed it at multiple points when we connected with the Indigenous folks. There was such an energy of sharing. There was such a sense of we've got each other's backs, that there was so much less selfishness, so much less fear. And I witnessed it in myself. My automatic response was, I'm alone, I'm sovereign, what can I get? Whereas with these guys, there was none of that. They were just like, we're full. We've got each other's backs. We don't need excess. We don't need more than what we need for this period of time. So they were very in the moment, and they were very content with the presence of each other. And that was so special. It was so special. And it did feel a bit jarring for me, because when I noticed the distance between my operating system and their operating system was humongous. And I've been working on this since, letting people in, letting myself be open-hearted and give and receive love more and have more sharing and generosity. But it's a very difficult habit to kick. It really is. It really is. And it's such a big contrast. And so that was beautiful. That was really, really beautiful. And I've got a list of at least 7 other points that I haven't shared yet, whole other learnings, whole other stories. But for today's episode, I'm going to leave it there. If you got value from this, share it out there, please. If you haven't left a review on the podcast, please do that. That'll be really meaningful for me, and I know it helps put the message out there to more people. But this is version 1, part 1 of my 10 days living off the land. And again, go check out Adam Kavanagh. He is such a unique person. He's lived off the land for up to 9 months at a time. And there really isn't many people like that in the whole of Australia. It's super rare. And it's really cool to get the know-how that he shares through his Instagram page. He's a special person with a special set of skills. And was a privilege to do that experience with him. So go check him out. And yeah, if you haven't sent me a message yet, please go send me a message through Instagram and connect and say hi and tell me the episode that you came from. And yeah, just sending all the love to you. And I'll see you in the next episode. Peace.